No. Right. Nick Durst here with Joe Calabrese. And Joe, we've had many New York Post writers on, but I'm sure the Red Fox within you is most excited for our guest today.
I'm actually very, very excited. Somebody we've been trying to get on now for a couple of months, and we're very happy we finally were able to get him on. He was actually at ESPN for a very long time. He was a columnist there. You are correct. He is now currently a columnist with the New York Post. Took that job earlier this year. He's also the author of 3 New York Times bestselling books, and he's got one coming out on the way, hopefully early next year, if that timeline is still aligned. So we'll get to talk about that. And we're very, very happy to have him on. Go Red Foxes, Ian O'Connor. Ian, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
So Ian, we want to ask you, what was your decision-making process when you decided to go to Marist? And going into there, did you know you wanted to come out working in journalism?
Not really, Nick. I went to a small Catholic high school, St. Cecilia's in Englewood, New Jersey, which is famous for Vince Lombardi being its football and basketball coach back in the 1940s. So I guess I was looking for a smaller school, and Marist just got some literature. And the process of picking a college back in the day, at least for me and most of my friends, was not what it is today, where kids and parents are going to 25 different schools. It was sort of, we looked at a couple and it was, hey, which one do you like? And I picked Marist. It was a beautiful campus on the Hudson River, close enough to get to home quickly, and also far enough away where you could live and get some separation from your parents. So I think going up to Marist, I remember my father, who wasn't one to praise too many people on too many occasions, but he came away thinking like, this is a friendly place. There's just a lot of good people up here, and on my first visit. So that was one of the reasons I decided to go there. But I didn't really have any career objective other than my vision as a kid was to be the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys. I loved Roger Staubach, and it was pretty clear that wasn't going to happen. So I had to find something in college to focus on. And my faculty advisor, who is now, I believe he's still there at the New York Times as a lawyer. His name is David McCraw. He actually wrote a famous letter to Donald Trump a couple of years ago. But he was he was advising the editorial staff on the Marist College newspaper, and he suggested that I should give that a shot. He knew I like to write. He knew I love sports, and so he said, "Why don't we try to put those two things together and have you write for the student newspaper?" So I did, and one thing led to another, and here I am all these years later.
So I was going to ask you specifically about the importance of the Marist College Circle, because I also wrote for the paper too. I was a sports writer there. So for those who are listening here who are right now interested in majoring in communications, interested in journalism, looking to go that route, and they are looking to go to college, how important is it to be involved and to be active, to write for the school paper and to do stuff on campus? And when you were at Marist, what was your intern situation like?
I interned at the Poughkeepsie Journal, and of course, back in the day, this was just when computers were coming into vogue. We actually, when I was first at Marist, this is early 1980s, we were typing stories on typewriters. We were doing it the old-fashioned way, putting together a newspaper without computers. Now, halfway through, we started using computers to put out the Circle, and it was only once a week. Of course, everything now is just online. But I think the main suggestion that I would give is do as many different things as possible under that media umbrella. Write for the school paper online. Try to get some in front of the camera and behind the camera experience for the school TV station. Try to get some production experience on the radio side and some hosting experience if possible. Do everything. Do as much as you can. And the more you can do, and Bill Belichick, who I wrote a book about, always says this, the more you can do for us, the better.
Yeah.
And so I think being versatile now, I think, is important. And Marist offers a lot of communication opportunities now. And I wish the sports communication program was in place when I was there. Now being able to attract people from parts of the country that it didn't in the past is important. And I think there are an awful lot of opportunities. I guess I would say this about any college and university in the country, is just do as much as you possibly can. Get as much experience as you can. It just makes you more valuable when you graduate for prospective employers.
No doubt about that. It's crucial there. You do whatever you can. And how did you go about, getting your work out there? What was the process like for you applying to jobs, and how many places did you apply before you ultimately got your first role?
I remember just through the regular mail and just sending out as many resumes as possible and copying clips. It was really old school, old fashioned. And today it's pretty easy. You could find people at major outlets and not so major outlets, top editors, production people, to send resumes to within seconds. And it was a process just finding out addresses and people to send your material to back in the 1980s. But that's what I did. I sent out, had to be 70 packets, resumes, combined with photocopied clips of stories and columns I had written. And I got a handful of responses. And one was I started out, actually, I got a fellowship called the Pulliam Fellowship right out of college, out of Marist. Basically, it was a 3-month summer program where I would write for the Phoenix Gazette and Arizona Republic in Arizona. It was a glorified internship, but it gave me a bridge and bought me some time from graduation to getting a real job, which my first job was at the Star Ledger in New Jersey, had a bureau that was really a sweatshop. And I worked for that place for, I want to say, about 15 months. And it was death notices, town meetings, obituaries, high school sports, you name it. It was everything, taking 150 phone calls a night and writing up summaries. And it was tough. It was a grind, but I learned quite a bit about the business and just how to work hard. And ultimately ended up at the New York Times in a writing program where, again, I was answering phones, I was getting people lunch, and I was the smallest possible fish in a very, very big pond. But I wanted to be around the best journalists in the country. And I figured if I could impress people at the Times with my work ethic, and they would give you opportunities at times to write. People got sick, vacation, all of a sudden. One day I remember I was scheduled to just answer phones all day and run out and get people lunch and things of that nature. But our college basketball writer called in sick, and all of a sudden I was sent down to Madison Square Garden to cover Georgetown against Syracuse in the Big East semis.
Wow.
So the opportunities were there if you were willing to work hard and just basically go to work every day, just trying to impress some of the best people in the business. And that's what I tried to do. That was my very humble start in the industry. And the National Sports Daily, which was basically in print far ahead of its time. It was ESPN.com in print. That was my first job where I was a full-time reporter, started by Frank DeFord, one of the great sports writers of all time. It only lasted 18, 19 months, but I also learned a lot just being in that environment, working with some of the best sports writers in creation. And then I took it from there.
Yeah. And how fortunate did you feel that you really never had to really leave the area you grew up in? A lot of people love to go to Wichita to start their career. You primarily got a lot of jobs in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area.
I was fortunate in that regard. And I think starting at the Times, again, in a very, very junior position, but maybe set me on that path. And the National, I remember its offices were on Fifth Avenue, and maybe symbolic of the spending that the National did that was unnecessary, and why we only lasted 18, 19 months. But so, and from there, I ended up at the Daily News. And the Daily News at the time, I believe, was coming off a strike. And so people had left, and there was an opening for a college basketball, college football writer. I had done some of that at the National. So I ended up at the Daily News for about 8 years, became a columnist there, got a couple of job offers. So they moved me up to columnist. And that was the goal. That was the dream, was to be a columnist at a big New York newspaper. And back then, getting your picture in the paper, writing opinion, and generally the columnists were the highest paid people in the department. That was the job. That's not the case anymore. And what I would advise young journalists coming out of school now to do, well, there are two different ways of going about it. If you're interested in making the most money and having the most visibility, and there's absolutely zero wrong with that, I think specializing in one thing is going to make you more valuable than anything else. When you look at the people like Adam Schefter, Adrian Wojnarowski, Rappaport, and a few others, they are right now the people and the players in the industry making the most amount of money and who have the most visibility because they specialized in one thing and became 24/7 insiders.
Right.
Now it's a grind and you're working every day, all day, but that's the payoff. I just thought about doing that some years ago, sort of taking a new path in my career, and decided against it because of what I love to do. So you could do that. You could also follow your heart and do other things. And as a journalist, it's tougher these days. But I love variety. I love being able to go columnize at the Masters, and then back to Knicks playoffs, and then over to the Yankees, and then to the Mets, and then maybe some national columns, and working on my books. And as a 24/7 insider, you are locked in on that one sport, that one league, that one team. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not what I wanted to do. But my advice to those who are interested in visibility and money, again, absolutely nothing wrong with that. Then that would be my advice, is to, after getting as much experience as you can in college, come out, try to hone in on one thing, one league, and take it to the bank.
So you built quite a reputation for yourself with various print papers. Any hesitation on your behalf to join ESPN, which was going to be a heavily digital role for you? We had Tim Kirkchin on with us. He said at the time when he took the role, he was like a little worried about it, but it obviously worked out great for him. So just your thought process there when you had the opportunity to join ESPN and you were kind of told you're really going to be writing a lot for digital.
It was, ESPN was already well established at that point. So we're talking March 2010. Right. I was also doing some radio for them at the time. So now, before I joined ESPN, I had done some radio for them in New York. So it was kind of a natural marriage. They were starting ESPN New York, which was a successful enterprise. And frankly, it was probably the best job I ever had. And it didn't bother me that I could no longer hold the product in my hands. You know, the world had changed, the industry had changed. And as long as there was still a demand for quality writing, now it was just appearing in a different form, that didn't bother me really. But ESPN New York's demise bothered me. I thought that as a site that was doing well, making money, successful, drawing a lot of views, at one point it was the most viewed sports website in New York, including Yankees.com and Giants.com and Knicks.com and the other outlets. And ESPN made a decision to get rid of those local sites, all of them. New York was by far the most successful of those local sites. And to me, because it's New York, you could have kept it as a boutique site. It was successful. It was working. And frankly, I'd still be there today if that decision was made. But it wasn't. They decided, well, we're getting rid of the others, so let's just get rid of ESPN New York as well. And I just thought that the people who made that decision, it was just a terrible choice and an unnecessary one as well. So it was unfortunate it happened, but it did. And so from there, I went to ESPN.com and enjoyed the vast majority of my time there. But as far as, hey, I'm now back at a newspaper, and although a lot of people consume New York Post content online, it's still nice, like today, to be able to go to the local deli or store and buy a newspaper and look at it and have it in your hands. But I'm 57 years old. I don't know how many people who are 37 or 27 feel that way, probably not many. So, and I'm fine with that.
Well, I'm 29 and I still get the urge to bring back the daily news of the Post from the corner
Good to
deli
hear.
every now and then.
Thanks, Joe.
So your tenure at ESPN kind of coincides with that rise of digital media. Now, Nick and I, usually we frame this question for the beat reporters that we've had on, the journalists who kind of work in the area. The question is, how do you teeter the line between getting something out there, growing your own brand, being out there for yourself, as opposed to keeping and withholding information in and kind of, keeping it within the confines of whatever company you're working for, right? So to kind of ask you it in a little bit of a different way, what have you noticed regarding the rise of digital media that essentially changed what you were doing the most? And in the current landscape, what is your advice to somebody who's Nick and I, our age, younger, still coming out of school, maybe doesn't necessarily know the repercussions of stuff regarding the digital world? So what would your advice be regarding that?
Well, speed has changed everything. It used to be when I was your age, if you had something at 8 in.the.morning, you had all day and night to work on it, to get more sources, to get things confirmed. And today, because if you're holding something an hour or two, chances are somebody else is going to put it out there. So there's a greater pressure today. I just think you can't sacrifice accuracy and thoroughness for the sake of being first. Too many people, I think, are concerned with being first and should be more concerned about being accurate. It's one of the great things about doing books. I'm now working on my 5th one coming out in February. Hopefully the timing's good. Mike Krzyzewski is in already the middle of his last season as coach. So we're putting out a book after the Super Bowl and right before March Madness, hoping that there's a window there of opportunity. But when you write books, you're taking 2-3 years to piece together the narrative and talk to hundreds of people and getting things confirmed. And that's not the daily reality of the internet. And so there's an awful lot of pressure on the people I mentioned earlier who are doing those jobs and are paid a lot of money to produce content quickly and very prolifically. But outside of those who are really good at it, you do see plenty of times where some reporters will be just too fast to put something out there without verification, and it comes back to bite that person. I would just say, the moment you believe you're basically 100% locked in on the truth with a story, then tweet it, then put it out there, but not a second before then. And it's not impossible, by the way, to still have what was traditionally called a scoop in the newspaper. It's happened. And there are also different ways to attack it. If you're covering the NBA and Woj and Shams are pretty much getting everything before you are, I mean, there are still things you can do and context you can provide and reporting you can do to almost turn it into guerrilla warfare, where you just fight the war a different way and still provide great context and information that they're not providing in their tweets. And so if I were covering the NBA today, if I got hired by an outlet tomorrow to be a national NBA reporter, so I'm pretty far behind, right? So particularly those two individuals and Woj above all. But while I'm playing catch up, I know there are things and stories I can do that they're not going to be able to do, where I can make an impact on my way to catching up. Might take 2-3 years, but along the way, I'm going to land some heavy punches a different way. So there's always a way of, and frankly, I had a story today about in the Post about a Giants scout who was fighting hard for Tom Brady in 2000 for the Giants to draft him. Story's been out there, his name has been out there, but I went to his house and sat with him and talked to him for 90 minutes about, okay, exactly what did you do? What did you say? What did you see? And exactly what was the Giants' response to you as a guy who's been a scout for them for when he retired in 2011. I think he'd been a scout for 39 years. And there was just a lot in there that had never been written about it. And they're about to play him on Monday night when the Giants play Tampa Bay. And who knows, it might be the last time they face Brady. I suspect he's going to be in the league long enough to play them again, but maybe not. We'll see. And I just thought, this is a story that is sitting there. The guy lives 20 minutes from my house. Let me see, he's 80 years old. Let me see if he's willing to, and he was. So that's not necessarily a breaking news story, but it's, I guarantee you, on Truth Serum, every outlet in New York, if you ask them, say, would you have liked to have had that story? They would say, yeah. And they didn't, we did.
Yeah.
So there are ways of, it's not a breaking news story in the NFL, something that Schefter would have, or Rappaport about a transaction, but it is still a meaningful piece of journalism that I think you would want to have, particularly if you're based in New York.
Yeah, I definitely think that, as a columnist, as opposed to being a specified person on one sport, it kind of gives you some more time. So do you think, coming from a columnist background, that has helped you become a New York Times bestselling author with your books? What differences or comparisons do you see between writing a column versus writing a book? And then let's also throw in your radio work there, the differences between 3 platforms, how things change for you as far as preparation is concerned.
One advantage I think I had in doing radio, the last time I did radio was this summer. I did some shows for ESPN New York, is I feel like a lot of hosts who are better at the craft than I am, but just haven't spent time in locker rooms and interviewing coaches and athletes and their families and their prior coaches from their youth, and just a lot of, and teammates, just a lot of reporting experience and context that I have being in those locker rooms. Granted, since the pandemic started, we haven't been in the locker rooms, but more than 30 years of doing that gives me some insight that a lot of hosts are not going to have. I always think reporting is at the core of good everything, good writing, good broadcasting. Michael Kay, the Yankees broadcaster, also ESPN New York drive time radio host, spent a lot of years in locker rooms as a beat writer. And I think that makes him a better broadcaster. I know it does. I'm sure he'd tell you the same thing. So and when we're talking about books and columns, as a columnist, I think the really good ones, and this is what I've tried to do over the years, never forget that the reason you got that column in the first place is because of your reporting. You were rewarded with a column because of your reporting. So don't ever forget that. So I do think the core of basically all good writing is reporting. And so I tried as a columnist over the last 30 years to always remember that. And as far as books are concerned, yeah, I think training myself that way to be that kind of columnist has helped me write definitive, what I hope are definitive, biographies of some pretty distant people. Belichick, now Krzyzewski, Jeter before that, tough nuts to crack. And people who didn't want me to write those books. And some who went out of their way to try to prevent me, or at least make it very difficult for me to write those books. So you have to have reporting skills to pitch around those problems. And that's what I tried to do.
So when you wrote your first book, was that a scenario where you were approached to write it, or is that something that you pitched to have done?
One day when I was at the Times, again, I was young, I was in my early 20s, I got a phone call from a literary agent named David Black, who's now, I think, widely considered the best literary agent, at least for sports books in the country. And he said he had read some of my work and liked it and wanted to meet. We met. So he put the bug in my head about writing a book. It took me a long time before I ever actually wrote one, because I heard so many horror stories from authors about just how difficult it was. So I was trying to get my career started in newspapers first. And so my first book, I believe it was my idea, if I remember correctly. So we're going back to 2003. And high school players were jumping to the NBA at the time. They were allowed to do that straight from high school. And I said, there's this kid in New York with a great name, a great game, and his name is Sebastian Telfair. He's going into his senior year. He's from Coney Island. He was a cousin of Stephon Marbury. He ended up in the cover of Sports Illustrated, despite the fact that he was a high school kid at 5'11" who couldn't shoot. And I said, how about spending a year following this kid as sneaker companies and AAU coaches and agents and major Division I programs and pro scouts and general managers were sort of converging around him, and just write about the process using his journey through his senior year as he was trying to get his family out of the projects of Coney Island, and just write about the craziness of that culture, the AAU sneaker culture. So that's what I did. That book, unlike my other books, it was a greater challenge. One, because I'd never done one before. So it was like a starter house. And I was really teaching myself on the fly how to write a book. But also, it was happening in real time. And with my other books on Arnold Palmer, Jack Nicklaus, Derek Jeter, Belichick, and now Krzyzewski, basically the story was already, it was over. And I was retelling it and going back and trying to unearth new details and anecdotes about those stories. But their careers, if they weren't over, they were in the end game. Whereas with Telfair, as he's trying to get to the NBA, I mean, he could have he almost broke his ankle at Fordham in a game that was televised. And so things were happening and I was trying, it was a whirlwind. And his life was too, as he had all these forces sort of coming at him and he's trying to figure out what to do, go to college, Rick Pitino at Louisville, or enter the draft. And so that was a crazy ride. It was a roller coaster ride, maybe fitting because of Coney Island, but I learned a lot about what to do and what not to do with the book by going through that process.
So I want to mention that you have some examples behind you. I see the captain plaque that you have. I see the Belichick book. So one by one, Arnie and Jack, Palmer Nicklaus, and golf's greatest rivalry. The captain, the journey of Derek Jeter, Belichick, the making of the greatest football coach of all time. Keep mentioning Coach K, so hopefully everything checks out there. I think I know how you're going to answer this question, but I did want to ask for our listeners who listen to this, what was your favorite individual personal story that went into any of the books that you wrote? And as a follow-up here, obviously when you're a writer, you're always thinking about next interview, next person who is somebody that you have never had the pleasure of interviewing, or somebody who intrigues you that you've always wanted to interview?
Well, starting with the most interesting story related to my books anyway, I would say when I sat down with Arnold Palmer and I told him I'm writing this book about the greatest rivalry in golf history, your rivalry with Jack Nicklaus. And I didn't mention, of course, that Nicklaus ended up dominating that rivalry. But I told him, and he agreed to see me in his office in, was it Orlando? I think we were in Orlando at Bay Hill, his golf course. And he listened for 10 minutes. At the end, he said, listen, nothing personal, but I get these requests like these a lot. And I wish you the best, but I think I'm going to take a pass. I'm really busy. And again, best of luck with the book. I wish you no ill will. Blah, blah, blah. So, okay, all right, I'm disappointed. I'm getting up to leave. And as I'm heading for the door, he says, one last thing. If Jack Nicklaus decides to help you, call me back. And it was perfect because it just really captured their rivalry. It's like he did not really want to help me, but he was afraid now he's going to let Jack Nicklaus, if he helps me, define the whole thing. So now I'm like, I have to get Jack to agree to help me, or at least to cooperate and grant interviews. So I asked Jack's publicist to arrange a meeting. I believe I was covering the Super Bowl and it was in Florida. And I drove up to Jack in, where is he? North Palm Beach. And so I went to his office and he had said no through his publicist too, but he agreed to see me. It was sort of similar to Arnold Palmer. So I had an approach that I was going to try with him. Jack Nicklaus was a workaholic, and with his game in his prime, and also as a golf course designer. And so I went in there and I just said, Jack, with or without you, I'm going to work as hard as you've ever worked in your life on anything, including your golf course projects, to get this right. That's my only objective. I want to get this story on your rivalry with Arnold right, with or without you. he said, okay, I'll help you. I mean, I was in his office 2 minutes and he agreed to grant interviews. And once I got him going, I couldn't get him to stop. I had a 5.5 hour interview with him on his private plane he was doing a project in Calgary. He said, if you meet me in Calgary, we'll fly back together on my private jet to Palm Beach and I'll talk for the whole 5 hours. So we did that. We land and he says, why don't you stay over at my house? And I thought, we're pushing it now because I offered to pay for the flight from Calgary to Palm Beach on his private jet. And I was afraid how much that was going to be. I didn't know. I was like, I'll write him a check for $400. I don't want to pay $4,000 for this. So I get my checkbook out on the flight. And by the way, at 40,000 feet, his wife served us steak. I remember she had the filet mignon in the back. So he said, put your checkbook away. You couldn't afford it anyway. That's what he said. Then we land and he said, why don't you stay over our house? It's like 3 a.m. I had a hotel. I was like, Jack, you've done enough. I can't. He says, no. And I said, I'm good. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. So anyway, that was a story that I very much appreciated because at the first part, Arnold, and then Arnold did end up helping once he found out that Jack talked to me. He did end up granting interviews to me, but I just felt like Arnold's whole approach there really just was a perfect synopsis of their frenemy relationship. One other thing is after the Belichick book came out, Bon Jovi, who's been a good friend of his, believe it or not, for 4 decades, saw me at the Super Bowl after the book came out. And he said, hey, that was a great book. And he said, I thought you were really fair to Bill. And I know some of his other friends feel the same way. And he said, has Bill said anything to you about it? I said, hey, John, you've been friends with him for 40 years. You really think Belichick's going to come up to a guy who just wrote an unauthorized biography and say, hey, good job? So he kind of chuckled at that. And that was the end of it. But I'll always remember running into Bon Jovi and him. I was like, hey, I'm just glad you read the book. He goes, no, you were very fair to him. And that's really my goal in every book, is fairness, accuracy, and just being relentlessly thorough in writing the hopefully definitive biography of that person.
Yeah, certainly. What a story there. Did you and Arnold Palmer drink any Arnold Palmers together during the interview process?
We didn't. The thing is, Jack was 10 years younger, 10 and a half years younger, and he could go for 5 hours. Right. Arnold at that point, after an hour, that I remember we did 2 hours sitting, and I felt after about an hour and 10 minutes, he was losing steam. And so, but I have to say, being in his presence, both guys really, but Arnold maybe particularly, he was quite a man. And he was a man's man at a time when he was very proud of that. He would fly his own plane and he almost crashed his plane a couple of times, but he was a guy he was sort of like the Marlboro man, old school, man of the earth, and he lived life, that's for sure.
So who else would you like to write a book on?
I don't really know. And usually I need time to decompress because these books take a lot out of you. And I wonder if they take some months or years off the end of your life. I hope not, because I'm in trouble if that happens. But I didn't really take much of a break after Belichick. I got an offer to do Krzyzewski, and again, I didn't know he was going to retire this year. So hopefully that helps. Thankfully, he decided to coach 1 more year, because it certainly would have hurt if he stopped before this season. But I didn't take really any time after Belichick. I sort of jumped right into this, and I think I'm going to need time after Coach K. But I really don't know. And I don't start thinking about that until the hardcover push. So really when Duke is done with the NCAA tournament, whenever that is, I'm hoping it's in the national championship game and they've won. But I would say I'm going to take 2-3 months after that before I even start thinking about it.
Yeah, definitely a grind. Last question here from me. You've been to a lot of great games, matches, events. To you, what is the most memorable thing you were fortunate enough to cover in person?
Well, a lot of great events, Super Bowl 42 is right up there. The Giants beating the 18-0 Patriots. That's pretty high on the list. The 2004 ALCS, Red Sox down 3-0 to do what they did, the historic way they broke the curse. I'll never forget that. That's up there. But it's funny, whenever I'm asked that question, Nick, for the game that, and I'm not saying this because of Coach K, the game that always pops into my head is Duke, Kentucky, 1992. You guys are too young to really understand what that game was like and the significance of it. I'm sure you've seen the Leitner shot on tape a bunch of times, but to be there in the Spectrum that night, courtside, and to see the defending champs Duke slug it out with Rick Pitino's recovering from a scandal Kentucky program. It wasn't his scandal, it was somebody else's, but still. And Mashburn, Jamal Mashburn of Kentucky had an amazing night, and it was just an incredible event with so much on the line. Duke as the defending champion trying to get back to the Final Four. Of course, they won it again. And Kentucky was really outclassed, outmanned outside of Mashburn, but they were so well coached. And it was just, that was an incredible, for a single game, certainly basketball, college or pro, nothing has topped that. But it's, hey, listen, Tiger in 2019, and unfortunately, my brother died months after that, but that was our last trip together. After you cover 20 Masters, they give you a ticket. I had never had a ticket to the Masters before, and I almost didn't accept it because I'd been critical of the club's membership policies over the years. I didn't know if I really should accept it. But I thought of my brother, and he wasn't sick or anything at the time. He was in his mid-50s, and I said, you know what? He's my only brother. I'm taking the ticket. I took it. I gave it to him. Thank God I did. And he had never been to a major before. And after Tiger made his putt at 16, when it looked like that was the clincher, we walked to the 17th tee, and I said, it's an amazing thing. You've never been to a major golf championship. You are now watching live the greatest Masters ever played. It's certainly in the top two with 86 and Jack. And so Tiger finished it off. And so that for me personally, because then he died months later, unexpectedly. So that is an event that obviously has deep personal meaning and is certainly right there in my top 3 or 4. It might be really number 1 because of my brother. So, listen, I hope Tiger can get back and give it one more crack. I'd love to see him win one more major. I don't know if it's possible, but that'd be a great thing for golf and a great thing for sports.
And we had a great time with you. Those were all great stories. It seems like the brain always goes to Super Bowl 42. I feel like we've asked that question a bunch, and it's always Giants, Patriots first. And Duke, Kentucky is a great answer. Obviously, Nick and I weren't here yet. And very great story there with you and your late brother. So, Ian, we wanted to thank you once again for joining us. We really appreciate it. I was a little nervous because I wanted to wear something Marist related. I don't have any shirt that fits me anymore, just my sweatpants. But I actually got this in the mail today, and can you see it?
I've gotten those. Yeah. I've responded to my share of those. I can't say I've responded to every one of those solicitations, but no.
I made a hard cutoff. I gave myself until 30 years old, and then once I turn 30 and beyond that, then I'll start to do my fair share, and I'll start to give back. But got that in the mail today, so obviously I was a good omen. But once again, we appreciate you coming on. If there's anything else you would like to share, promote, obviously we want to plug your book about Coach K one more time. It's coming out early next year. Really, really happy you did this with us.
No, thank you, Joseph and Nick. I wish you guys the best in your careers, and it was a pleasure being on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's going to do it here for this episode of You Know I'm Right. For our very special guest, Ian O'Connor, and my co-host, Joe Calabrese. I'm Nick Durst, and this has been You Know I'm Right.